Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Henny, and I'm a content producer here at Creator Economy Live. And I'm super excited to be joined by Danny here from Head of Social Media Insights, Analytics, and Measurement at Haleon. So for those who might not know Haleon, they have brands like Panadol, Advil, Sensodyne, and a lot more that you would know day to day. And today we're talking all things social listening and the importance of and significance of social listening in today's world, where there's conversations happening online every day. But before we get started into the questions, I just want to ask the audience, like, why did you sign up for this webinar today? You can pop it in the chat. We want to know what you want to get out of the webinar. In this quick 30 minutes that we do have, we will have some time at the end for a Q&A. But yeah, feel free to pop some questions in there as we go. While you're putting those into the chat, I'll let Danny kind of tell us more about this extensive role that he has at Haleon and how social listening plays a factor into that.
Thanks, Henny. It's great to be here and great to be back with the Creator Economy Live brand. Had a wonderful time presenting at your guys your guys event in Las Vegas, which was a ton of fun, and I'm never one to turn down a trip to Las Vegas. Um,
Of
but
course,
yeah, so
yeah,
I'm I'm
it was good fun.
yeah, no, I look forward to next year and hopefully many years to come. So I'm Danny Gardner. I'm the head of social listening, social insights, social analytics, social measurement, kind of a lot of different things. My job's kind of evolved over the last few years. And yeah, so we're Haleon. We're the big CPG behind, as Sandy said, Advil, Sensodyne toothpaste, Tums, Emergency, competing in 100 plus markets. So we're a big global company. And I oversee what my job kind of started out as is really just all the, kind of in-house social listening that we do, which in its simplest form is when people talk about brands or really anything online, I'm the guy that gets to go out and collect the data and analyze it, right, and turn it into something that we can use as a company. Right, it's a form of consumer feedback. And so over the years, we've kind of built up and matured capability in a team and tech stack around this, and I'm able to do the work of 5 or 6 people, which is testament to just being in the space for a long time and just evolution of tech and AI, which is very buzzy right now. And it's been a lot of fun. And so in the last, I want to say like year or so, my role has taken on more of a measurement focus, right? A lot of this is driven by the pressure that we get as a marketing function that CMOs impose on us, right? That everything has to be tied to some sort of measure, right? We want to take actions that are backed by data, right? Not necessarily by gut, although I, as a data guy, believe there's a place for both and using both. And I think some of the best analytics people have great gut instinct and intuition. So that's a whole big kind of debate. But yeah, so all of the influencer marketing that we do, we have a brand new agency that kind of helps us kind of run these campaigns. And so I work closely with them and a few other different folks from PR, our paid media team, consumer experience, a few different folks that kind of work together. And then I'm insights and analytics and measurement. So I come in and I'm kind of the data steward or the janitor, if you will. That's kind of what I've always been doing. But at its core, I've seen the convergence of like, hey, my job for a long time has been analyzing creators and their behaviors online, right? User generated content, that type of stuff, into all right, now I can analyze our stuff, right? And the creators that we're using, right? We have a full fledged strategy and tactics that ladder up to that strategy that we're going to use. How do we know what works, right? We don't have historical data, right? It's a new company we're working with, new set of creators, right? We've kind of always, gone to the travel and foodie, right? There's other areas to kind of break out. There are other niche audiences that we can reach. So that's part of my job is to test a lot of that, crunch the numbers, pull down a lot of the historical performance, and to advise on really kind of content strategy, right? What works, the splits, the tiers, a lot of different things. It's been fascinating to learn because it's really very different from social listening, but it kind of goes hand in hand, right? It's kind of the full fledged like social media suite, social, full stack marketer, full stack social marketer, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's what I do. I've been with the company a little under 6 years. And I've had the pleasure of getting to do this for some of the most popular OTC brands in the world. So there's a lot I've learned, there's a lot that's
Nice.
challenged me. There's a lot I struggle with day to day. I'm certainly not perfect, but it's such a fascinating role, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, at least not yet.
Great. And in those 6 years that you have been with Haleon, have you seen the role of social listening kind of become more and more important with even like the increase of using influencers and the rise of like different platforms? Have you seen your role kind of change from when you started 6 years ago?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I was just talking with someone the other day. I actually saved the original job description from when I applied, which was it's just kind of funny because it's nothing like what the job ended up being. And I recently redid my job description after like a 3 year hiatus last year. And like I made me take a step back and say, hey, well, this has kind of changed a lot fundamentally. And even the more advanced elements of like what we can do is just like we've grown, I've grown as a person. So that's kind of where, and I look back, social listening kind of in its own bucket, it's evolved, kind of, exponentially, at least what it's felt like in the last few years working at our company. And then at the same time, I think other social listeners would agree, right, is that there's kind of a natural harmony between the two functions. Historically, like these are two very different roles. I remember like meeting like the first like pure play like influencer marketing person. I'm like they didn't know what social listening was. I didn't really know how I knew what they did, but I didn't really know how they did it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. These are, were two roles that didn't really exist, 6, 7 years ago. They weren't mainstream. They certainly weren't in house. But there is again a harmony to them, right? It's that I'm the voice, I'm basically a proxy to the customer, right? I'm on the digital front lines, as I like to say, in that I'm closer to our consumers than pretty much everyone in the company, barring like maybe our sales force and some of the kind of shopper folks. Excuse me. And I think like that's important, right? Like they tell us exactly what they want, what they like, what they don't like. They tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of that has kind of helped inform like, okay, well, we know what people like, what people think is funny. We know their propensity to consume humor, right, and serious and educational content, right? And so creators in their own right, they're doing the same thing. They have the same strategy. They log into the same exact pages, right? They have the same kind of Instagram password, experience that everyone else does. And now it's a competition, right? It's like in many ways brands compete with creators, right? We're all in what's called and recognized as the attention economy, right? So everyone's fighting for impressions. It's not just us against the traditional kind of CPG companies. It's everyone and it's creators. So I think on the opposite side, the influencer marketers are seeing the same thing. It's like, well, how do we know? Like, how do we learn more about these people's, fandoms and like their followers and what interests are around, Jake and Logan Paul, right? To Selena Gomez and her brand. A lot of these creators have diversified into businesses, some of them that would compete against us, right? Kendall Jenner, who launched the Moon toothpaste brand, right? A lot of that was just born out of like brand equity, right? Kim Kardashian with Skims, right? The list kind of goes on, and so I think like that's the kind of convergence between influencer marketing and social listening. So I think there's a story to tell for someone who's come from my background and the influencer background. But now that I see both, I have a greater appreciation now for the folks on the influencer side who really just want to hear more from their customers or from really, if you think about the one to one, right, the creators followers, right? You have to treat, if I'm a
Hmm.
creator, I treat my audience as my customers too, right? What do they want? And that's something I've learned
Yeah.
doing just creating my own content. So it's amazing how like kind of full circle this has become and this role is and how it's defined. And a lot of other companies are starting to take shape. I've noticed, um, a lot more companies are starting to hire for this particular role. And I think that's a good thing, right? State of industry is better. There's a lot more talent in the
Hmm.
industry. So I think it bodes well for companies from all categories, all businesses, and all shapes and sizes.
Nice. And I did want to ask on within social listening, and is that, are you listening to conversations that's happening on social platforms, and also are you listening to, is it competitor brands, is it influencers who are using your brand, is it consumers who are using your brand? What does it kind of encompass? Just kind of interested in hearing a bit on that.
Yeah. Gosh, it seems to include everything these days.
Okay.
But it typically includes your mainstream social media, the biggest being Meta. Um, Meta is actually, it's a kind of a long-winded story, which I'll try to keep short here. But basically, ever since Cambridge Analytica happened, Facebook basically, gave data to a third party and, they shouldn't have. And they basically kind of ruined it for everyone. and that was back in 2018, I want to say. And so there's a lot more controls in place for third parties. So it's made it harder for social listeners to have access to full like in feed, um, data. And it's really difficult, right? So everything you log on to Facebook right now, you look at your user feed, right? We can't actively mine that, right? That's intentional, right? Meta is not allowed to provision other companies, social listening companies, to be able to do that. Um, so that's kind of the one big caveat on Facebook and Instagram, which are two of the biggest social medias. The other big ones are Reddit, Twitter, or now X. That's pretty mainstream. Pinterest, we have access to, which we don't use a whole lot, but there's other companies that do, which I think is also very interesting. So it kind of spans from everything from mainstream kind of social media to emerging media, which is everything from like Discord. We're in a private beta for access to Discord. Not very useful, I think, for our company, but for other companies, I think it would be. Twitch, we get some basic access to Twitch, which is the popular live streaming app, mostly very popular with gamers, but anyone in any kind of creator niche can be on Twitch. So that's kind of where I kind of see the breadth of like your mainstream stuff and you're not TikTok, right? Is obviously one of those sources. Very difficult to access. People forget like TikTok's a very young company still. They've only been around for 8 years, 9 years maybe. I remember when I first started, like they were only a 5-year-old company or 4-year-old company. They're a rocket ship, right? So they're not necessarily built or engineered with the social listener in mind. And that's kind of, I think expected. They're building for the creator, right, and for the
Hmm.
consumer. That's why they're the behemoth that they are. So as far as sources go, we cover pretty much everything that you can access, with the exception of Snapchat. That's the big. It's not really a social network because it's private and it's mostly like dark social is what they call it. So that's the only really lone exception.
Okay.
But yeah, no, that's kind of covers the sources bit. And Henny, remind me, what was the other part of the question? It was like use cases.
On well, I was actually going to jump into another one of the questions I had is so
Oh.
you're talking about all those channels, especially TikTok, and there's
Mm.
so many conversations happening within these channels. I'm just wondering if you have any advice for people, and our audience would be on like the influencer team. So anyone who is working with influencers who kind of want to listen in on those conversations, where do you recommend they start? Because there's just so much out there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of it's a great question because it's probably one of the most challenging, both for me on the analytics side and those that are on the influencer side. And so a lot of the insight and kind of community building and a lot of like the like pure social and like marketing stuff, a lot of that's happening by manually. It's in the comments. That's because there's no real turnkey tool to be able to access that stuff or to mine it or to analyze it. And I keep reading more and more in the press is like, one of the biggest KPIs is like sentiment in comments. I'm like that it's a hard endpoint to access when you look at it one to one with the other social apps, but it's even harder for TikTok, which there's no fire hose. There's no way to kind of crawl or scrape or mine or search the whole app. So the advice I'd give is like focus on things that matter most to you. I have a bad habit of like wanting to get everything and look at everything that I possibly can. And for some brands and like for some teams, that makes a lot of sense. But for me, and I used to be that way, but now I'm like, you know what? You end up boiling the ocean. Forgive the use of the corporate jargon. Um, that's really what it felt like. I'm like, I'm searching all these different things we know, but you know what? At the end of the day, if I just want brand mentions, Advil's not a popular brand on TikTok. You go search it natively, right? And a lot of what you search, right, doesn't include what's said in voiceovers, right? Natively searching in TikTok can only get you so far, right? Going through your For You page can only get you so far. So the state of industry is still that everything is very, very manual. And that's difficult because TikTok is a rocket ship and it's leaving everyone in the, kind of in the dirt or the dust. So that's what's been, I think, really, really difficult for us. But, when you look at influencer teams, that's everything from, it's UGC, right? Is like, where are there people? I think this was part of your last question was like, when we look at influencers, we're not necessarily going out and looking for influencers. They show up organically in our data. That's everything from Amy Poehler, Mark Ruffalo. There's a bunch of different celebrities that have mentioned us one off because we're top of mind. Or there was a moment, or they experienced us or their customer. It's a great earned media or like seeding moments. We send them product and they want to post about us or thank us. That's also kind of free PR that we get. Um, so sometimes they come up, and it's usually easy to see because you can sort by reach and followership in most of these tools. So you can see the people that bubble up to the top. They're not always necessarily the most interesting or actionable either. Like there was, I remember a few years ago, Preparation H, we had a piece of UGC from this like outdoor like hiker creator guy who had pretty good followership. I forget how many followers, and his engagement on one post was basically like, "Hey, I want to be an influencer or spokesperson for Prep H." I forget the rest of the context, but it was something funny and kind of tongue in cheek. I remember thinking, I was like, "Oh, this is someone A who posted about our brand that that actually physically showed the brand, and he got 3,000 likes on this thing, and like our Prep H stuff can't get that, and like our averages are not that high. We're lucky if we get 10 likes." Right? Which again, we're a younger brand, Prep H, but still, I'm like, this is a great opportunity. And we ended up not partnering with this guy for a couple other reasons. Sometimes it comes down to the language they use, their sentiment, how they interact with other people. So that's also observed through social listening too, is like a risk assessment, right? Is this someone we can realistically work with, right? Someone that an influencer agency might not necessarily come to us with, but we found out in the wild, right? And that's like years ago. That's before we ever really even had a true like influencer marketing strategy or team. So that's kind of
Interesting.
where it's also the everyday customer, right? It's the people with 10,000 followers or the people with 5,000 followers, right? The people who are true fans and everyday customers. So we kind of include everyone, right? It's like it's not just go out and look for celebrities and that tier of creator, right? It's the everyday creator, right? It's the people that took the time out of their day for whatever reason. There was some stimulus to get people to post about our brand. They can post about anything. They don't have to post about
Okay.
us, but they choose to. So there's usually some kind of
Yeah.
driver motivation behind why they do that, and that's what I analyze. It's all kind of behavioral analysis.
Okay, nice. Cool. And would I know that we were talking just before this, but would love to share with everyone else on some examples that you have well, some campaigns that you've run yourself through social listening or things that you found through social listening for your brand, but then also an example of another brand using social listening.
Yeah. Well, the one that immediately comes to my mind, which we were talking about, excuse me, was again Preparation H. So for those of you who may not know what Preparation H is, or if you've used it, it treats hemorrhoids, which you should Google discreetly if you don't know what that is. But basically, it's around your butt area, and so it's a very taboo thing. And like I remember when I first started the company back in 2019, we didn't have any benchmarks. We had no like working knowledge of like any volumes or just like really basic metrics for our brands. Like if I asked you what the average volume is for Prep H, I wouldn't expect anyone in the audience to know that off the top of their head. But I remember like I asked myself that. I'm like, I should know this. And I'm like, well, we don't have any working data. I have to go solve and collect this. So when I was doing that, and really just kind of doing the really basic setup that we did in like the first few weeks, I realized like, oh, Preparation H, like people actually talk about their in-person experiences with the product. They talk about it online. They talk about it in the store. There's a lot of like there's a high tolerance for humor, and like something that's so taboo is not very taboo, right? Between what Reddit is as an anonymous forum where people will happily share that they use the brand, to people that aren't anonymous and that share their experience with the brand. And I remember thinking, I'm like, this is fantastic, and we don't do any marketing around this. Social spend was zero. There was no paid, there was no organic, there was nothing. And like that was one of the ideas that we in doing that data. One of the insights we came through with was there's a lot of LGBTQ plus folks that use this product, especially gay men, because it's also used as kind of an intimate thing, right? And like that's all kind of the bridge to butt care. And we realized I'm like, oh, this is very interesting, and they're organically fans of our product and they use it, and so it's a great tie to content strategy. So we started doing that last year, maybe 2 years ago, in organic, and then we pulled it through to influencer. So we partnered with, and again, you have to forgive me, Henny, I forget the names of the two or three creators that we use. One was actually a group of creators, or like a band, or like they're kind of like group of 5 or 6 men, and we produced content with them, and it was all around Pride. I'm like, this is a brand we've kind of this is a customer that has stood by us, and we want to stand by them, and the content ended up doing about 9, 10, 11% above average from what Preparation Nation was historically doing, which is one of our best brands in organic and an influencer. So for that to come through, which was all based out of a, born from a social listening insight we had years ago that we've tirelessly kind of fought to bring through into our content. And we did. And our team got a lot of credit for that, and continue to. It was such an easy kind of win for us. And, we're trying to diversify too, right? Is how do we find other niche audiences like this? It's getting harder, right? That stuff was kind of, one layer down so you could see it. But now it's like, all right, how do we make content for the community that's even smaller than that, right? Then that's not necessarily growing.
Yeah.
So a good example directly from us at Halion.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's also like you're hearing it from the people who are using the products. You're really like getting down to that niche and understanding, well, as you mentioned, like using humor um, around the topic or and that performing well. And it's something that you might not have known without social listening. It also kind of builds on like that authenticity factor as well. I know that word's thrown out a lot, but like I can imagine it really helps with that too.
It does, and that's such an important point of part of brand voice. And it's hard to get right. I'm like we try to build personas of like what we want our brands to be. Sometimes it's really hard, right? I'm like our pain brands are a good example: Advil, Excedrin, Voltaren. How do you interact with a pain brand, right? And like when you're in pain, you just want relief, right? There's no room for like making fun of a migraine, which is debilitating, right? And disproportionately affects women, right? And so like there's certain things that like you have to tread lightly on, or you just can't do it all. So it limits your creativity, right? But everything from cough, cold, flu is another interesting kind of category for us when it comes to authenticity, right? Is Robitussin, which is one of our cough, cold, flu brands, and Theraflu, another one. And Theraflu, we make syrups and we also make powders that you can mix into what's kind of like a quasi tea. And that tea form or the powder form is only available for Theraflu. Robitussin doesn't have that. Um, and so there's kind of a delineation between the two products in the portfolio. But for the most part, like you have Robitussin, which is very culturally relevant. There's a famous Chris Rock bit where he talks about how black families grow up, believing that Robitussin can treat everything. Like it was the cure all. It's like I'm not sending you to the hospital, just put some Robitussin on it. Chris Rock it's such a funny bit, and like we see that come through in our data. The Black community loves Robitussin, and I'm like it's very different than the kind of behavior and sentiments that are towards Theraflu, which is really more of what I describe when I'm like trying to help us build our personas is like it's a warm hug, right? It's a much different sentiment. It's not the cool friend, right? It's an entirely different thing. But these brands are also regulated, right? So like we can only make certain claims around this because they're more serious products. It's not like a chapstick, which we used to own, the chapstick brand, because it's different, just medicinally. And the FDA has different standards it holds us to. So we are somewhat limited by being in the category we're in. Um, and that's what makes like authenticity and brand voice a lot of things. Again, we try to source through social listening. It makes it really hard, but when you look at other brands, like Starbucks or Chipotle or some of the really really progressive brands in the space, right? They're funny, right? And like humor wins, and I'm like that everyone is right to at least try humor because that's what gets people's attention, right? And it's what helps recall, And so like it's a not so secret, and we've seen that too. So we're trying to fit that in everywhere we can. A lot of that's rooted in social listening. So um,
Okay,
kind of interesting in
nice.
terms of
And
where we're
so,
seeing it across the portfolio.
I'm just conscious of time, but I did want to touch on where where would people start? I mean, you kind of mentioned that you're using some tech and AI within your program and there at Halion, but where would
Mhm.
people start if they wanted to um, get into social listening and start to implement that in their influencer program?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, and I'll be pretty transparent about this. There's a barrier to entry for a lot of companies, right? Like some of these tools, although I think that these tools have never been more affordable. Like it doesn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this type of work. You can do it, in some ways less than 100,000. And I don't want to stand up here and praise any one particular company, I have my vendors, but all other companies have different kind of vendors for different reasons. So there is kind of a barrier to entry, which I've been trying to lower, right? Just in what little influence I have in the industry, because it should be more accessible, right? That's one of the biggest like thing in DMs I get is like, hey, I'm a freelancer or we're a small brand and we can't afford $100,000 tool for what we need to, right? And there's a learning curve, right? Like not everyone has a full fledged team or industry or the budget behind this. So I think that's a very real kind of like um, challenge in industry, which I hope in the next like 3 or 4 years is gone, and there is kind of an entry level offering, and right something that it doesn't have to be a full fledged offering. It's just something enough for people to get involved and for people to use it, right? So as far as starting, well, you could follow me on LinkedIn because I post about this all the time. A lot of different stuff, everything from really your basics, right, your methodologies, a lot of different things. So there's a lot of great resources out there too. LinkedIn's a great resource. I learn a lot from a lot of the other social listeners in the industry. Um, but yes, as far as starting, I mean, I would definitely focus. It's different because I'm a portfolio company, so like I've got to be able to recreate what I do for Advil across 24 other brands and our competitors. Right, we have a large competitive set. We're a huge company, right? My job is even more challenging just because of the breadth of who we compete against. Which all you gotta do is walk down the vitamin aisle and you'll know what I mean. Um, so with that, I mean, if you're one brand or single brand, right? Think about this in a couple different ways, right? Every brand has a corresponding category. Whatever you do, right? Whether you're, I'll use Nestle for example, right? If you make Toll House cookie dough, people who use cookie dough aren't necessarily buying that brand. How people experience cookie dough and what they make with it differs, right? Your brand's not always mentioned in those spaces. So that's also what I advise a lot of people is that even if you're a small brand and you don't have a lot of brand mentions, that's not the end of the world, right? Is like go look into your category for the things that are yours. Maybe you're a small business that's moving into confectionery, right? Or maybe you make your own candy salads, which was a big trend on TikTok last year, right? And like that's ideally what you would want to look at, right? And I know the team at Mondelez, right? And like they make all these candies and snacks, and right, and like they look at that business and that data set just like we look at mentions of migraine and headache. People experience it differently, and Advil doesn't always work for everyone, or Excedrin, right? Sometimes it works for competitors. Sometimes people use herbal remedies. Sometimes they smoke weed, right? There's a lot of different kind of variables that exist. So the advice I'd give is, try to focus on, you know, one or two things, right? What you want to get after, an unmet need, something that people really like, where you can double down on that. I'm big on doubling down, right? The stuff we know that works and that people have liked forever, right? It's like that, don't fix what's not broken, right? Double down on it, right? And then there's also when you're a larger customer base, right? There's a lot of unknowns, right? There's a lot of customers that like I can't relate to them because I have different interests, right? But with social listening, you can kind of uncover and discover those. And some of it comes from, all right, being able to do some form of topic analysis to really just having the patience to read through a lot of these comments. It's when you take the time to actually like read what people say. Some stuff's interesting, some stuff's not, but it brings you closer to your consumer, right? And that's institutional knowledge that you build up for your company and for yourself, right? I'm like I've worked on 7 categories for the last 5 years, right? Like that's a huge advantage, right? And I've learned a little bit over a long period of time about all these categories. Right? That's valuable for you as a teammate, right? As someone in a company that's large and right, you're a problem solver, right? It's like when you have that working knowledge, you just become more valuable to your team, to your boss, to your subordinates. So like it's just a win-win. So hopefully that was useful advice, at least just as far as like starting out goes. If there's any other questions too, I'm happy to field them uh, separately and outside of this. I know I probably threw way too much at you guys, but I could talk about this all day.
No, that was great. No, really, that was super interesting. And if anyone does have a question before we close out, please put it in the chat because we're shortly out of time, unfortunately. But just want to say a huge thank you to Danny for joining us today. Also, if you enjoy this type of content, we've got loads of webinars on demand through our website, Creator Economy Live. Um, it's in our webinars. You'll see it when it's on the website. We also have our event. Danny kind of mentioned it at the start. Our event Creator Economy Live taking place on the February 4th and 5th in 2025, which is literally around the corner. It may not feel like it, but it definitely does on this side. It's an influencer marketing event for brands. Brands attend for free. And if you are interested in attending and not a brand, we do have a discount code for you as well, which is let me get it up here, but it's um, C CEL webinar 20, and I'll put it in the chat as well. But yeah, sorry, little promo code there. But yeah, thank you so much, and talk to you soon, Danny. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Henny. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, me too. Bye.